The morning of the school assembly started just like any other. The gym hall was filled with rows of folding chairs, colorful banners, and the faint buzz of hundreds of excited voices. It was the annual awards ceremony, a day when students, teachers, and parents gathered to celebrate achievements, talents, and the school spirit that tied everyone together. The smell of polished wood and new paint mixed with the distant sound of laughter echoing from the hallway. Among the crowd sat a girl in a plain blue dress, quietly folding her hands in her lap. She wasn't the kind of person who liked attention. She preferred sitting near the back where she could blend in easily. Most people in the room knew her face but didn't know her story. To many, she was just another student, quiet, polite, often seen helping in the cafeteria after school. She didn't talk much, and when she did, her voice was soft, as if she was afraid her words might disturb someone. The assembly was about to begin, but a small problem had come up. The student who was supposed to play the piano to open the ceremony hadn't arrived. The piano sat silently at the front of the hall, its surface shining under the lights. Teachers whispered among themselves, trying to decide what to do. The microphone squeaked slightly as the principal leaned forward, tapping the side of it with a finger. "Well," he said with a polite laugh, "it looks like our pianist is running a little late. Does anyone here play piano? Maybe just something simple to start us off?" There was a pause. Dozens of students looked around at each other, waiting for someone to raise a hand. No one did. A few people chuckled quietly. Someone in the front joked, "Come on, anyone can play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." The laughter grew a little louder. That's when a teacher standing off to the side noticed the quiet girl near the back. "You," he said with a kind smile. "I think I saw you near the music room once, didn't I? You know how to play a little, right? Why don't you give it a try?" Her heart skipped. She hadn't expected that. For a moment she thought he must be talking to someone else, but when she looked up, everyone's eyes were suddenly on her. She shook her head slightly, whispering, "Oh no, not really," but her soft words were lost in the noise. The teacher encouraged her again, waving her forward. "Just a simple tune," he said. "Nothing fancy. We just need a bit of music before we start." The students began to whisper. Some smiled, others exchanged skeptical looks. A few even rolled their eyes, already expecting something awkward. She could feel her palms grow damp, her heartbeat racing in her chest. The piano felt like a mountain in front of her, large, shining, and impossible to climb. She wanted to refuse, to sink back into her chair and disappear, but something inside her, and maybe a small stubborn spark, told her to stand up. Her legs felt heavy, but she slowly rose from her seat. The sound of her shoes against the gym floor was louder than she expected. The entire room seemed to quiet down as she walked to the front. Every step felt like it took forever. The whispers followed her like a faint trail. "Does she even know how to play?" someone whispered. "Maybe she'll just bang on the keys," another said with a laugh. She kept her eyes on the ground, pretending not to hear. When she reached the stage, she hesitated for a moment, glancing at the principal, who gave her an encouraging nod. The piano stood in front of her, elegant and intimidating. The lid was slightly open, revealing the polished black and white keys beneath the stage lights. She took a deep breath, smoothing her dress nervously before sitting down on the small bench. For a moment, she didn't move. The audience waited, expecting her to start with something light and playful, the kind of music anyone could attempt. Her fingers hovered over the keys, but her mind wasn't on the room anymore. It drifted back to another time, a smaller room, an old upright piano, and her mother standing nearby, humming softly as she practiced. Back then, music had been everything to her. She had spent hours every evening practicing until her hands ached. It was her world, her comfort, her way of speaking without needing words. But life had changed. When her father lost his job and they had to move to a smaller place, the piano had been left behind. The lessons stopped, the dreams paused. For years, she hadn't touched a piano again. Not until this moment. The murmurs from the audience pulled her back to the present. Her hands were trembling, but her heart whispered that she still remembered. Music never truly leaves a person. It just waits quietly, like a friend standing in the shadows. Someone from the back called out playfully, "Just don't mess up," followed by a few laughs. Her face flushed, but she didn't look up. She took another slow breath, trying to steady herself. Then quietly, she pressed one key. A single soft note filled the hall. It was clear and pure, like the sound of a drop of water in silence. The audience went quiet, surprised by how steady that note sounded. Then another followed, and another. Her fingers began to move carefully at first, then more fluidly, as though they were remembering a language she hadn't spoken in years. The sound grew richer. The melody, though simple, had warmth and feeling. The crowd leaned in without realizing it. The same students who had giggled earlier were now watching in silence. The girl's posture changed. Her shoulders straightened, her expression softened. It was as if she'd stepped into another world entirely, one only she could see. But just as she began to lose herself in the music, the principal signaled gently for her to stop. The event had to begin. She lifted her fingers off the keys, startled, realizing she'd gone further than just a simple tune. The audience clapped politely, though not everyone understood what they'd just heard. She gave a small, nervous smile, stood up, and walked back to her seat. A few students nodded at her as she passed. One whispered, "That was actually good." Another said, "Didn't expect that." But most were already distracted, chatting again as if nothing special had happened. She sat down quietly, her heart still racing. She wasn't upset. She hadn't done it for applause. Something inside her felt alive again, like she had reconnected with a piece of herself that had been missing for a long time. The ceremony continued, speeches, laughter, and awards. But every so often, someone's eyes would drift toward the piano. There was something about the way that melody had sounded, something gentle yet deep. They couldn't quite explain it, but it had left a small mark in the air, a moment of calm beauty that hadn't been planned. After the assembly ended, a few teachers gathered near the stage. One of them asked curiously, "She really played that? Without any sheet music?" Another nodded. "Seems so. She said she hasn't played in years." But you can tell that wasn't just random notes. That was talent. Outside, the students spilled into the courtyard, chatting about the awards and taking photos. The girl walked out quietly, hugging her bag to her chest. The sunlight felt warm against her skin. A few people smiled at her as they passed, and she smiled back, though she wasn't sure they even remembered her name. On her way home, she took a longer route that passed by an old music shop. The windows were dusty, and inside she could see the faint reflection of several old pianos lined up in a row. She stopped for a moment, staring at them through the glass. Her fingers twitched slightly, remembering the feeling of the keys. She almost went inside, but then she shook her head, smiling softly to herself, and kept walking. That night, when she sat at her small desk to do homework, she couldn't stop thinking about the sound of the piano. It wasn't the applause or the looks of surprise that stayed with her. It was that single quiet moment when her fingers first touched the keys and everything else disappeared. She realized that maybe, deep down, she had been waiting for a reason to start again. She didn't know it yet, but that small performance, that simple tune, had planted a seed. The people who saw her play would remember it far more than she imagined. And in ways she couldn't yet see, that single moment would soon change everything. For now, though, she sat in her room, listening to the sound of the evening rain tapping against the window. Somewhere inside her, a soft melody played, one that promised that her story was only just beginning. The next day, the girl felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness as she walked through the school corridors. Everything felt slightly different after the assembly. The previous morning's performance still lingered in her mind, like a soft echo that wouldn't fade. She didn't say anything to anyone about it. She wasn't looking for attention or praise, but somehow she could feel that other people had noticed her, even if they didn't say it out loud. As she approached her locker, she saw a few students huddled together, whispering and glancing in her direction. She kept walking, pretending not to notice. But one of them called out softly, "Hey, you! Yesterday at the assembly, that was, wow." She paused for a moment, not sure how to respond. "It was nothing," she said quietly, her voice barely carrying over the noise of the hallway. She quickly shut her locker and walked away, trying to focus on her books instead of the sudden attention. Her heart was still pounding from yesterday, but this time it wasn't fear. It was a strange mix of pride and nervousness. In class, things felt different too. Teachers who had once barely noticed her presence now gave her small, encouraging smiles. A few students who had been distant suddenly seemed curious, sneaking glances in her direction or whispering to their friends. It wasn't all flattering attention. Some still whispered with skepticism or mockery, but there was a new energy in the air that she couldn't ignore. During lunch, she sat quietly at her usual table in the cafeteria. She liked this spot because it was a little away from the busiest areas where she could eat without being crowded. As she unpacked her lunch, a teacher approached and asked if she could speak to her for a moment. Hesitant but polite, she followed the teacher to a quieter corner. "I just wanted to tell you," the teacher began softly, "that what you did yesterday, it was really special. I've seen many students play, but there was something about the way you handled the piano, the feeling, the emotion. It wasn't just music. It was like you were telling a story." The girl felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. She wasn't used to receiving such genuine praise. Most of the time, her efforts went unnoticed, even when she worked hard. But this felt different. It felt like someone had really seen her, not just the quiet girl in the corner, but the person she had always been inside. "Have you thought about continuing with piano?" the teacher asked. "I mean, really continuing. There are opportunities, scholarships. People would love to hear you play more." She hesitated. For years, she had pushed music aside. Life had other demands: work, school, family responsibilities. Piano was something she had loved, but it felt like a distant dream, almost unreachable. Still, the words of the teacher stirred something inside her, a spark she hadn't felt in a long time. Back at her table, she watched the other students. Some were laughing loudly while others were comparing notes and gossiping. Yet in the middle of all that noise, she could almost hear the faint echoes of yesterday's melody in her mind. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers, and it reminded her of who she really was beyond the cafeteria, beyond the quiet corners of classrooms, beyond the ordinary routine of life. After lunch, she had music class. She had avoided the piano for years, but now, sitting in the room full of instruments, she felt an unfamiliar excitement. The piano at the front of the class called to her. She approached it cautiously, her fingers brushing over the keys as if greeting an old friend. The sound was familiar, comforting, like a voice from the past. Her classmates noticed. A few whispered, "Is she going to play again?" Others exchanged curious glances. She didn't care about their attention. She just wanted to touch the keys and let the music flow through her again. She started with something simple, a melody that had always been easy for her. The notes felt right under her fingers, smooth and alive. The teacher walked by, smiling. "You remember, don't you?" she said softly. "That's wonderful." The girl smiled faintly, nodding. She realized she hadn't felt this alive in a long time. Music wasn't just a hobby or a skill. It was part of her identity. For the first time in years, she felt like herself again. As the day went on, more students approached her, some shyly asking if she could play for them during breaks or after school. A few even asked if she would perform at the next school event. She didn't answer immediately. She wanted to be sure she was ready, that she wasn't doing it for attention or praise, but because it mattered to her. At home, she thought about yesterday and today. The quiet moments in her room, the feel of the piano keys under her fingers, the soft sounds echoing in her mind, all of it made her feel a strange mix of joy and longing. She realized she had missed this part of herself more than she had known. Later that evening, she sat by her small window watching the sun set over the rooftops. The sky turned soft shades of pink and orange, and a gentle breeze ruffled the curtains. She thought about the assembly, about the applause and the surprised faces, and something inside her shifted. She wasn't just a student who had played a tune for a few minutes. She was someone who could make music that mattered, someone whose quiet presence could still command attention when she chose. Her mother noticed the change too. She had been quietly watching her daughter from the kitchen, a soft smile on her face. "You played beautifully yesterday," she said, her voice warm and proud. "I knew you had it in you." The girl shrugged lightly, feeling both embarrassed and happy. "It was just a simple tune," she said softly. But her mother shook her head. "Sometimes the simplest things leave the biggest impact," she said. Don't forget that. The next morning, as she walked to school, she felt a strange confidence. She wasn't loud or boastful. She didn't need to be. But she carried herself a little taller, moved a little more purposefully. She could feel the eyes of some students on her again, but this time, she didn't shrink away. She simply walked past them, focusing on her own path. In class, the piano teacher approached her with a folder of music sheets. "I thought you might like to try something new," the teacher said, handing her a piece of music. "It's a little more challenging, but I think you're ready. I'd love to see you try it." Her fingers brushed over the sheet nervously. The notes looked complex, more than she had played in years. But the challenge didn't scare her. Instead, it ignited something she hadn't felt in a long time: determination. She nodded, taking the sheet carefully. "I'll try," she said softly, but with a firmness in her voice that surprised even her. The class period passed quickly as she practiced quietly at the piano. Her classmates watched, some impressed, others skeptical, but she didn't mind. She was lost in the music, in the feeling of creating something beautiful with her own hands. The room seemed to fade away, leaving only her and the piano, the sound filling every corner of her mind. After school, a small group of students gathered outside the music room. They weren't mocking or teasing this time. They simply watched, curious, as she practiced a piece that was new to her. Some of them whispered to each other, "She's really good," or "I didn't know she could play like that." But she didn't notice. Her focus was entirely on the music, on learning, on rediscovering a part of herself she had almost forgotten. That evening, she sat at her desk again, thinking about the day. She realized that the small step she had taken yesterday, agreeing to play at the assembly, had changed something inside her. It had opened a door that had been closed for years, and now she couldn't stop herself from stepping through it. She picked up her old practice notebook, flipping through pages filled with notes, exercises, and unfinished melodies. She smiled softly, tracing the lines with her fingers. The memories of her younger self, full of dreams and hope, felt close again, as if waiting for her to catch up. The days that followed were filled with small moments of discovery. She practiced in the mornings before school, during breaks, and in the quiet evenings. Each note, each melody made her feel more alive. She started to dream again, quietly, about performing for people who would listen, about creating music that could touch hearts. Even though she didn't say it out loud, she knew that something had shifted. She was no longer just the quiet girl in the corner. She had a talent, a gift, and for the first time in years she felt ready to embrace it. And so day by day she returned to the piano, not for applause, not for recognition, but for herself. Each note she played was a small step back to the person she had always been, the person she had never really lost. The days passed quickly, and the girl found herself drawn more and more to the piano. It wasn't just an instrument to her anymore. It had become a companion, a place where she could breathe, a place where she could express everything she had been keeping inside. She would wake up early before the sun had fully risen and practice in the quiet of her room. The notes she played were soft at first, almost hesitant, as if she were afraid of waking the world. But slowly, the music gained confidence, growing stronger and more alive with each day. School became a different experience for her. She still walked the halls quietly, still avoided unnecessary attention, but there was a new energy surrounding her. People noticed, some with curiosity, some with admiration, though no one knew exactly what had changed. Even the teachers seemed to treat her differently, giving her encouraging nods and small smiles when they passed by. It was as if the simple act of playing at the assembly had opened a new chapter in her life, one that no one else could see yet. During music class, she started experimenting with more complex pieces. The sheet music that had once looked impossible now felt like a puzzle she was eager to solve. Her fingers moved more freely, remembering patterns and movements from long ago. The piano teacher noticed her progress and encouraged her to try different styles, from soft classical melodies to more lively, expressive pieces. She felt alive in ways she hadn't felt for years. Every key she pressed reminded her of who she was, who she could be. One afternoon after school, she was practicing alone in the music room. The late sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. The room was quiet except for the sound of her playing, soft at first, then gradually more confident. She didn't realize that a few students had lingered outside the door, listening quietly. They weren't there to mock or laugh this time. They were genuinely curious. One student whispered to another, "I didn't know she could play like that. She's amazing." The other nodded. "Yeah, it's like she's telling a story with her music, you can feel it." She didn't hear them, but inside she felt something shift. For the first time, she began to believe that maybe her music could reach others, that it could matter beyond herself. It was a small thought, almost fragile, but it stayed with her as she continued to play. At home, she began spending more time thinking about her music. She dug out old notebooks, practice sheets, and even recordings she had made when she was younger. Listening to them made her smile, remembering the joy she had once found in playing. She realized how much she had missed that feeling. The way music could make her forget everything else for a while. The way it could fill her with hope and purpose. Her family began to notice a change too. They had always known she liked music, but now it was different. She would play in the evenings, not for anyone in particular, just because she wanted to. Her parents would listen quietly, sometimes leaning against the doorway, letting the music fill the house. It was calming, almost magical, how something so simple could shift the entire atmosphere. One day, the piano teacher approached her with a suggestion. "There's a small recital coming up at the community center," the teacher said. "It's nothing huge, just a chance for students to perform in front of an audience. I think you'd be perfect. You could play something you've been working on." She froze for a moment. The thought of playing in front of people again outside the school made her nervous. She remembered the assembly, the surprised faces, and the way her hands had trembled at first. Could she do it again? Could she face a larger audience without feeling afraid? But then she thought of the piano itself, waiting patiently in the music room, ready to sing with her fingers. She realized that fear had always been part of her life, but music had never let her down. If she let herself try, maybe she could overcome the hesitation that had held her back for so long. I'll do it," she said quietly, though her voice carried a mix of determination and nervousness. The teacher smiled warmly, understanding the courage it had taken for her to agree. In the days that followed, she practiced tirelessly. She chose a piece that was challenging but beautiful, something that would show not only skill but emotion. Each practice session lasted hours. Her fingers grew sore, but the soreness didn't matter. She was reconnecting with herself, with the part of her that had always loved music, and nothing else seemed as important. School friends began noticing her dedication. A few classmates who had once ignored her now peeked into the music room, watching her play. Some whispered to each other, "She's really good. Did you hear her today?" Others simply shook their heads in quiet amazement. But she didn't let it distract her. Her focus was entirely on the music, on perfecting each note, each transition, each pause. One evening, while practicing late at home, she stopped for a moment and looked out the window. The city lights glimmered in the distance, and she realized how far she had come from the quiet girl who had barely raised her hand at the assembly. She had faced her fears, embraced her talent, and discovered a strength she didn't know she had. The thought made her heart swell with a quiet pride. When the day of the recital finally arrived, she felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. The community center was small but elegant, with rows of chairs facing the stage. Parents, students, and local music enthusiasts filled the room, chatting softly as they waited for the performances to begin. The piano sat at the center of the stage, its polished surface reflecting the soft lights. Backstage, she could hear the nervous whispers of other performers. Some were seasoned players, confident and calm, while others trembled just like she did. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment, but also the familiarity of the piano beneath her fingers. She remembered the countless hours of practice, the moments of quiet determination, and the joy of rediscovering her passion. When her name was called, she walked onto the stage slowly. The audience turned to watch her, curious to see the quiet girl who had been chosen to perform. She sat at the piano, adjusted the bench, and placed her fingers on the keys. The room grew silent, waiting for the first note. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the music flow through her mind. Then gently she pressed the first key. The sound filled the hall, soft and pure. One note led to another, and soon, the melody unfolded like a story. Every movement of her fingers, every rise and fall of the music, carried emotion and depth. The audience leaned in, captivated by the beauty of the performance. As she played, she felt herself disappear into the music. The worries, the doubts, the fears, they all vanished. It was just her and the piano, creating something beautiful together. The applause and recognition she had received at the assembly were distant memories now. This moment was about the music, about expressing everything she felt and had kept inside. By the time she reached the final notes, the room was silent. The last chord lingered in the air, heavy and meaningful. Then slowly the audience erupted into applause. The clapping was warm and genuine, filled with admiration and surprise. She opened her eyes, seeing the faces of people moved by her performance. Some smiled, some nodded in respect, and a few even had tears in their eyes. She stood up from the piano bench, feeling a rush of emotion. She had done more than just play a piece of music. She had shared a part of herself, and it had touched others in ways she hadn't imagined. Backstage, the piano teacher embraced her gently. "You did wonderfully," the teacher said. "That was more than skill, that was heart." She smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. She realized that this was only the beginning. Music was no longer something hidden or private. It was a path she could follow, a way to connect with the world, and a part of her identity she would never ignore again. As she walked home that evening, the streets glowing with the fading light of day, she felt a quiet sense of joy. She had faced her fear, embraced her talent, and discovered a strength she didn't know she had. The piano had opened a door, and she had walked through it with courage and determination. And deep inside, she knew this was only the start of her journey. There were more melodies to explore, more performances to share, and more people to touch with the music that had always lived within her. She smiled softly to herself, feeling a sense of hope and purpose that would guide her in the days to come. After the recital, life began to feel different in ways she hadn't expected. The applause from the community center still echoed in her mind, a reminder that what she had done was more than just a performance. It had been a statement, a moment where she had shown the world a part of herself that had long been hidden. She walked through the school halls with a quiet confidence. Though she didn't seek recognition, there was a new awareness in her movements, a sense that she had finally stepped into her own light. Some students who had previously ignored her now stopped to offer congratulations. A few asked if she would play for the next school event, and even some of the teachers encouraged her to join the music club officially. She listened politely, sometimes nodding, sometimes smiling, but she didn't let the attention overwhelm her. She knew that this wasn't about being noticed. It was about embracing something she loved. The piano practice continued, and it became a part of her daily routine. Mornings, afternoons, evenings, whenever she had a moment, she returned to the instrument. She experimented with new pieces, improvising small melodies that carried her emotions. Sometimes they were soft and reflective, other times lively and expressive. Each note, each chord, felt like a piece of herself coming back to life. One day, while she was practicing a particularly challenging piece, the piano teacher stopped by with a thoughtful expression. "You've come a long way in a short time," the teacher said. "But there's something I think you need to understand. Talent alone isn't always enough. It's dedication, emotion, and persistence that make a musician truly remarkable, and I can see that in you." She looked up from the keys, feeling a mixture of pride and humility. She had always known she loved music, but hearing it from someone else, someone who understood its depth, made it feel more real. "I want to keep learning," she said softly. "I want to get better." The teacher nodded, smiling. "Then I think it's time for you to perform in a bigger setting. There's a regional competition coming up. It's a bit intimidating, yes, but it's a chance to see what you can do beyond the school and the local community center. I believe you're ready." Her heart skipped. A competition sounded daunting. The thought of playing in front of judges, of being compared to other talented musicians, made her stomach twist with nerves. But then she remembered the recital, the small moment on stage where she had felt completely alive. She had faced fear before, and she had survived, even thrived. Maybe this was the next step. "I'll try," she said, her voice firm, though her hands trembled slightly. The teacher's encouraging smile made her feel braver than she had in years. Over the next few weeks, she immersed herself in preparation. Every spare moment was spent at the piano, practicing scales, memorizing pieces, perfecting timing, and exploring the emotions behind the music. Her fingers grew stronger, more precise, and her confidence grew alongside them. Sometimes she struggled with difficult passages, hitting wrong notes repeatedly. But she didn't give up. She knew that progress wasn't always easy, and she was determined to push through. At school, the whispers and curious glances followed her, but she hardly noticed anymore. She was focused on the music, on the journey, and on the person she was becoming. Occasionally, students would ask her to play something for them in between classes, and she would smile politely and oblige. Each performance, no matter how small, strengthened her connection to the piano and reminded her of why she loved it so much. One afternoon, while practicing, she paused and listened to the sound of the keys reverberating through the music room. The notes carried a warmth she hadn't felt in years, and she realized that music wasn't just a skill or a hobby. It was a way of expressing herself, of communicating emotions that words could never capture. Every mistake, every hesitation, every triumph on the piano told a story. And for the first time, she felt that the story was truly hers to tell. As the day of the regional competition approached, the excitement and nervousness intertwined in a way she hadn't experienced before. She spent hours preparing mentally, imagining the stage, the audience, the judges, and the sound of her music filling the room. She visualized herself playing with confidence, letting the notes flow naturally and connecting with everyone listening. The day of the competition arrived, and the atmosphere was electric. The auditorium was larger than any stage she had played on before, with bright lights, rows of seats filled with spectators, and a grand piano at the center of the stage. Performers of all ages and levels were preparing, some practicing final notes, some pacing nervously, some chatting with their teachers. She felt a flutter of anxiety, but it was tempered by a deep sense of purpose. Backstage, she took a deep breath and adjusted her dress. Her fingers tingled with anticipation. She thought about all the hours she had spent practicing, the nights she had dedicated to perfecting each piece, and the courage it had taken to say yes to this opportunity. She reminded herself that this wasn't about winning or losing. It was about sharing a part of herself through music. When her name was called, she walked onto the stage slowly, feeling the eyes of the audience on her. The lights were bright and the auditorium felt vast, but she focused on the piano. She sat on the bench, adjusted her posture, and placed her hands on the keys. She closed her eyes briefly, letting her fingers remember the movements they had practiced countless times. The first note resonated through the hall. It was clear, precise, and filled with emotion. One by one, the notes built into a melody that carried the audience along with her. The room was silent, every listener captivated by the music. She could feel the energy of the audience not as pressure but as a connection, a shared experience that transcended words. As she continued to play, she lost herself in the music. She felt every chord, every pause, every nuance with her whole being. The judges watched intently, taking notes, but she wasn't playing for them. She was playing for herself, for the journey she had been on, for the discovery of her own strength and talent. The audience felt it too, drawn into the emotion and depth of her performance. By the time she reached the final chord, the hall was completely silent. The note lingered in the air, heavy and meaningful before the applause erupted. It was thunderous, filled with admiration and genuine appreciation. She stood bowing slightly, her heart racing with a mixture of relief and joy. She had done it. She had shared herself, her music, her passion, and it had resonated with everyone who had listened. Backstage, her teacher embraced her, smiling broadly. "That was extraordinary," the teacher said. "You didn't just play the notes. You told a story. You connected with everyone in this room, and that's what music is truly about." She smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. All the hard work, all the hours of practice, all the moments of doubt, they had led to this. She realized that this was more than just a performance. It was a turning point. Music was no longer just a part of her life hidden away. It was a path, a purpose, and a way to connect with the world in a way that words could never achieve. That night, as she walked home under the soft glow of streetlights, she reflected on everything that had happened. She remembered the assembly, the community recital, and now the competition. Each experience had pushed her further, revealed more of herself and opened new doors. She realized that she had grown not just as a musician, but as a person. She had learned to face fear, embrace opportunity, and trust in her own abilities. At home, she sat quietly at her desk, her fingers tracing the edge of her notebook. She thought about the future, about the endless possibilities that lay ahead. She didn't know where this journey would take her, but she felt ready. The music had become a part of her identity, a source of strength and joy. And no matter what challenges came next, she knew she could face them with the same courage she had discovered in herself. As she closed her notebook and looked out the window at the night sky, she felt a sense of peace. The stars twinkled faintly, and she imagined each one as a note in the endless melody of her life. She realized that the journey was far from over, but she was ready to continue one note at a time, one step at a time, and deep inside, she knew that this path, the path of music, discovery, and courage, would shape the rest of her life in ways she had only just begun to understand. The weeks after the regional competition were a blur of excitement, planning, and quiet reflection. The girl had received letters from local music organizations, invitations to perform at small concerts, and even offers for private lessons with skilled instructors who wanted to help her refine her technique. It was overwhelming yet thrilling. She had never imagined that the quiet, careful steps she had taken toward the piano would lead to such opportunities. Every day, she practiced diligently, not because anyone demanded it, but because she loved it. The piano had become more than an instrument. It had become a part of her life. Each key she pressed, each note she played told a story about her journey, her struggles, her hidden talent, and her growing confidence. She remembered the shy, hesitant girl who had walked nervously to the piano at the school assembly, and she realized how far she had come. Her family watched her transformation with quiet pride. They had always known she had a gift, but now it was impossible to ignore. They supported her in every way they could, rearranging schedules, helping with transportation, and creating a small space at home where she could practice uninterrupted. It wasn't just the music that had changed. It was the girl herself. She carried herself differently, spoke with more confidence, and smiled more often. She seemed lighter, as though the weight she had carried for years had been lifted. One afternoon, a local cultural center invited her to perform at a charity event. The event promised a larger audience than she had ever played for before: community leaders, families, and even some local media. She felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness, but the thought of sharing her music with people who had never heard her before filled her with purpose. When the day arrived, she entered the auditorium and saw the stage, the grand piano, and the rows of seats stretching farther than she had imagined. The lights were brighter, the room more formal, but she didn't let that intimidate her. She remembered everything she had learned, every moment of practice, every small success. She reminded herself that she was not performing to impress anyone. She was performing to share a piece of herself. The audience waited quietly as she approached the piano. She sat on the bench, adjusted her posture, and took a deep breath. Her hands hovered above the keys, trembling slightly, but her mind was focused. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the memory of her past performances settle in her mind. Then softly she began. The first notes floated through the air, delicate and precise. The melody grew gradually, gaining confidence and emotion with each measure. The audience leaned forward, captivated by the music. Some had tears in their eyes, others sat silently, completely absorbed. She was no longer playing alone. The music had connected her to everyone in the room. As she played, she allowed herself to feel everything: the nervousness, the joy, the excitement, and the pride. Each note carried her emotions. Each chord told a story of her journey, from hesitation to confidence, from hidden talent to recognized skill. The piano seemed to respond to her, each key producing a sound that reflected her heart. When she reached the final notes, she held them briefly, letting the sound linger in the room. Then she lifted her hands and the hall erupted in applause. The clapping was louder and more heartfelt than she had ever experienced. She stood, bowed slightly, and felt a wave of relief and satisfaction wash over her. She had shared herself fully, and it had been received with warmth and admiration. After the performance, several people approached her, complimenting her technique, her expression, and the way she had conveyed emotion through the music. Some asked if she would be willing to perform at other events, and others encouraged her to pursue a more serious path in music. She listened politely, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and humility. She had never sought fame or recognition, but the positive response made her realize that her talent could reach far beyond her own imagination. That night she returned home and sat at her desk, reflecting on everything that had happened. The journey from the school assembly to the charity event had been incredible, filled with small victories, moments of doubt, and experiences that had pushed her to grow. She realized that her life had changed in ways she hadn't anticipated, and she felt both excitement and responsibility for what lay ahead. Her piano became a constant companion. She continued to practice diligently, exploring new styles, experimenting with improvisation, and learning from every performance. She discovered a joy in music that went beyond technical skill. It was about storytelling, emotion, and connection. The more she played, the more she understood that her gift was not just for herself, but for anyone willing to listen. The girls' school began to take notice too. Teachers praised her progress. Classmates looked up to her in admiration, and the school administration invited her to perform at important events. She was no longer the quiet girl who had blended into the background. She had become a symbol of dedication, talent, and courage. But despite the growing attention, she remained humble and focused. She didn't play for applause. She played for the music itself, for the joy it brought her, and for the connection it created with others. One day, a letter arrived from a regional music foundation, offering her a scholarship to attend a summer music program. It was a chance to study with professional instructors, to refine her technique, and to meet other talented musicians. She felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. It was an incredible opportunity, but it also meant stepping even further out of her comfort zone. After thinking it over carefully, she accepted the scholarship. She knew it would be challenging, but she was ready. She had already faced fear, embraced her talent, and shared her music with audiences beyond her imagination. This next step felt like the natural continuation of her journey, a chance to grow even more. At the summer program, she discovered a world of possibilities. The instructors were skilled and patient, guiding her through advanced techniques, encouraging her to explore different musical styles, and helping her express her emotions more fully through the piano. She met other students who shared her passion, each with their own story and talent. They practiced together, learned from each other, and supported one another through challenges. Through it all, she remained grounded. She remembered the shy, hesitant girl who had first walked to the piano at the school assembly, and she recognized how far she had come. She realized that talent alone wasn't enough. It was the courage to take risks, the dedication to practice, and the willingness to share herself that had brought her to this point. The performances at the summer program were different from anything she had experienced before. She played in front of large audiences, including instructors, fellow students, and visiting guests. Each performance was an opportunity to challenge herself, to grow, and to connect with listeners. She felt a deep satisfaction in every note, knowing that her music had the power to move people, to inspire them, and to convey emotions that words could not. By the end of the program, she had grown tremendously, both as a musician and as a person. She had learned to trust herself, to embrace her talent, and to share her music with confidence. The experiences had shaped her identity, strengthened her resolve, and opened new doors for the future. When she returned home, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She continued to practice, perform, and explore new opportunities. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a bridge between her inner world and the world around her. It allowed her to express herself, connect with others, and discover the strength and courage she had always carried within. The journey that had begun with a simple request at a school assembly had grown into something far greater than she had ever imagined. She had faced fear, embraced opportunity, and discovered a talent that had always been part of her. Along the way, she had learned the value of persistence, the joy of discovery, and the power of music to touch hearts and change lives. As she played her final notes one evening, alone in her room, she realized that this was only the beginning. The piano had given her a voice, a purpose, and a path to follow. And she knew, deep in her heart, that she would continue this journey, exploring every note, every melody, every emotion, and sharing her music with the world, one performance at a time. Her story was no longer just her own. It belonged to everyone who had listened, everyone who had been inspired, and everyone who had witnessed the quiet girl transform into a confident musician capable of moving hearts. The simple act of taking a seat at the piano had changed her life forever, and she knew that the music would guide her for years to come. She smiled softly, her fingers resting lightly on the keys. The journey had been long, the challenges many, but the rewards, the connection, the expression, the joy, were worth every step. She closed her eyes and began to play, letting the music flow freely, carrying with it the story of a girl who had discovered herself, her talent, and the endless possibilities of a life filled with music. And in that moment, she felt complete, knowing that her journey was ongoing, her story still unfolding, and her music ready to touch the world in ways she could only imagine.